In the quiet suburbs of Bath Township, Ohio, back in the early 1960s, nothing ever seemed out of place. Kids rode bicycles across long driveways, fathers mowed their lawns every Saturday morning, and every family on the street knew the next-door neighbor. It was the kind of neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked and trusted that danger lived somewhere far away. But inside one particular house, a modest, ordinary-looking home tucked beneath tall trees, a darkness was slowly waking up. His name was Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rebellious. In fact, most neighbors barely noticed him. He was that quiet boy who walked with his head down, shoulders slightly curved inward, like he was trying to fold himself into a smaller version of who he truly was. At school, teachers described him as polite, but painfully withdrawn. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. He didn't start fights. He didn't make friends. He was just there. But behind that silence, behind those timid eyes, something far more unsettling was quietly forming. Jeffrey's childhood was not the kind that made headlines. It wasn't violent or explosive. Instead, it was cold. His father, Lionel Dahmer, was a hard-working chemist who spent long nights buried in textbooks and laboratory work. His mother, Joyce, struggled with severe anxiety and depression. Arguments filled the house, not the kind where plates smashed, but the kind where silence dragged on for hours, heavy enough to choke a child. Jeffrey learned early. Keep your feelings quiet, keep your fears hidden, and stay out of the way. He grew up believing he wasn't seen, and that belief became the foundation for the monster he would later become. But the first sign, the first true sign, that something was deeply wrong appeared when Jeffrey was just a young boy walking home one summer afternoon. He stumbled upon a small animal carcass by the roadside. A normal child might scream or run or cry, but Jeffrey didn't do any of those things. He froze, and then he knelt beside it. Not with fear, but with curiosity. It wasn't the death itself that interested him. It was the body, the stillness, the shape, the silence. Over time, that curiosity grew into something ritualistic. Jeffrey began collecting roadkill in secret, gathering bones and carcasses in the woods behind his house. He kept his treasures hidden, exploring them the way another boy might explore a puzzle or a toy. To him, dead things didn't judge. They didn't leave. They stayed exactly where he put them. That twisted sense of control would become the core of his future crimes. As Jeffrey entered high school, things got worse. The arguments at home intensified. His mother's mental health collapsed. His father buried himself deeper into work. Their marriage disintegrated before Jeffrey's eyes, but no one asked him how he felt. No one checked on him. No one noticed that the quiet boy in the back of the classroom was sinking deeper into isolation. By age 14, Jeffrey discovered something else that would shape him forever: alcohol. Not as a drink, but as an escape. He brought beer to class in his backpack. He drank behind the school. He drank in the mornings before school started. It numbed the loneliness. It blurred the chaos. It made the world feel softer, and it kept the monster inside him from speaking too loudly. But alcohol also lowered his barriers. It loosened the darkness inside him. It allowed his imagination to go places most people's never would. And that imagination wasn't filled with dreams. It was filled with fantasies of power, dominance, and bodies that could never walk away from him. By 17, Jeffrey Dahmer was no longer just a troubled boy. He was a fractured soul, alone, unheard, unnoticed, carrying inside him a storm that had never been addressed, never been treated, and never been seen. Then everything snapped. His parents' marriage imploded once and for all. His mother packed her bags, took Jeffrey's younger brother, and left the house in chaos. His father moved out separately, thinking Jeffrey would be okay for a few days alone. But Jeffrey wasn't okay. For the first time in his life, he was completely alone. No parents, no rules, no supervision, no one watching, no one listening. The silence in that empty house was overwhelming, and it woke up a desire he had buried for years. A desire for absolute control, for possession, for someone who couldn't leave him, couldn't reject him, couldn't walk away. And in the summer of 1978, the quiet, invisible boy who had lived in the shadows his entire life crossed the line he could never return from, the line between troubled and terrifying. The next part of the story begins with a young hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks walking down a sunlit Ohio road, unaware that the boy who looked harmless the boy who lived in the shadows, was about to commit his first murder. Part 2. The First Kill. It was the summer of 1978 in Bath, Ohio. The streets were green with maple trees, and the sound of graduation parties carried through the air. Jeffrey Dahmer had just finished high school, 18 years old, socially invisible, quietly intoxicated most of the time, and already drowning in loneliness. His mother had moved out, his father was away, and the house on West Bath Road was his, completely empty. It was supposed to be freedom. But for Dahmer, it was a storm waiting to happen. One humid afternoon, he was driving when he saw a hitchhiker walking shirtless along the road, a young man carrying a guitar. His name was Stephen Hicks, 19 years old, friendly, easygoing, just trying to get to a concert. Dahmer slowed his car, smiled, and offered him a ride. "Hop in," he said, with that polite Midwestern calm. "I'm just heading that way." They talked about music, girls, beer, normal things. Hicks told him about the rock concert he wanted to see. Dahmer nodded, pretending to be interested. But under that calm voice, something was stirring, a dark, forbidden curiosity that had followed him since adolescence. When they reached Dahmer's house, he invited Hicks in for a few beers before dropping him off. Hicks agreed. It was hot, and he was friendly by nature. They drank, laughed, lifted weights, listened to music. For a few hours, Dahmer felt almost normal. Someone was in his home. Someone was talking to him. But when Hicks stood up to leave, Dahmer's panic began to grow. He didn't want the moment to end. He didn't want Hicks to go. The thought came suddenly, a voice whispering from the pit of his loneliness. "If he leaves, you'll be alone again." And then something inside Jeffrey Dahmer snapped. When Hicks said, "I really gotta go," Dahmer reached for a dumbbell from his weight set. He walked behind Hicks, raised it high, and brought it down on the back of his head. The sound was heavy, final. Hicks collapsed to the floor. For a moment there was silence, just Dahmer's shaky breathing filling the room. He crouched beside the body, touching it, staring in disbelief at what he had done. He told himself it was an accident, but it wasn't. He stayed there for hours, watching, afraid, yet strangely calm. Later that night, the horror deepened. Dahmer dragged Hicks's body to a crawl space, unsure what to do. But as the hours passed, his fear turned into fascination. He stripped the body. He examined it. And then curiosity turned into compulsion. Days later, he dismembered Hicks with a knife, methodically, as if trying to erase what had happened. He placed the pieces in plastic bags, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered the remains in the woods behind his house. And when it was all done, he sat alone, drinking beer, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, as if nothing had happened. No police came. No neighbors noticed. The secret was his, and his alone. That night marked the beginning of a dark awakening. Killing Stephen Hicks didn't fill his emptiness. It only made it deeper, but it gave him something he'd never felt before: control. In the weeks that followed, Dahmer drove by the same stretch of road many times, staring into the woods, reliving what he'd done. He knew he should feel guilt, but what he really felt was curiosity. What if he did it again? What if he could make someone stay forever? He buried the memory and moved on with life, even attending college for a while. But the seed had already been planted. No one around him, not his family, not his friends, had any idea that behind that awkward, quiet smile was a young man who had killed, dismembered, and hidden a human being within days of graduating high school. Jeffrey Dahmer's story could have ended there, but monsters rarely stop after the first taste, and soon that hidden hunger would come crawling back. Part 3. The Quiet Neighbor with a Dark Hunger. After the murder of Stephen Hicks in 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer tried to return to something resembling normal life, if normal could ever again exist for someone who had crossed that irreversible line. He drifted through college, then dropped out. He briefly joined the army, only to be discharged for alcohol abuse. He moved between relatives, jobs, and towns, never truly fitting in, never able to outrun the shadow of what he had done. And for nearly 9 years, that shadow lay quiet. No one suspected anything. Not his grandmother, who he lived with in West Allis, Wisconsin. Not his co-workers. Not his neighbors. Not the pastors at the church she encouraged him to attend. Jeffrey Dahmer learned how to blend in, how to smile politely, how to respond when spoken to, how to pretend he was just another struggling young man trying to get his life together. But beneath that thin mask, the darkness he had tried to bury began to stir again. It started as fantasies, memories he replayed late at night, alone in the dim guest room of his grandmother's house. Memories of a body that couldn't leave him, a body he could control, a body that stayed exactly where he placed it, a body like Stephen Hicks. The loneliness crept back in, filling him like a slow-spreading fog. The alcohol stopped numbing him. The fantasies became louder, sharper, harder to ignore. And Dahmer, quiet, withdrawn, invisible Jeffrey, began hunting again. At first, he convinced himself he wasn't looking for victims, just company, someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge him, someone who might stay a little longer than a passing conversation or a one-night encounter. But in the bars of Milwaukee, dim, loud, anonymous, he found more than company. He found opportunity. His first attempt to drug a man in a hotel room ended disastrously. He blacked out from drinking, woke up the next morning, and discovered that the man beside him was dead, beaten and bloodied. Dahmer claimed he didn't remember doing it, but whether he remembered or not didn't matter. The darkness had returned, and it was hungry. And so he tried again, deliberately this time. In 1987, inside a room at the Ambassador Hotel, Jeffrey Dahmer made a choice that would seal his fate for the next 4 years. Stephen Tuomi was his name, a young man, friendly, trusting, unaware of the danger sitting across from him. Dahmer drugged him, killed him, and stared at the body with a cold fascination that felt disturbingly familiar. This time, he didn't panic. This time, he didn't run. This time, he examined, posed, preserved. The monster that Dahmer had managed to keep buried since 1978 had finally surfaced, not as a moment of rage, but as a calculated desire. A desire for control, a desire for possession, a desire for bodies that belonged only to him. After Tuomi, the killings became more frequent. Dahmer lured young men with promises of money or photographs. He met them in bus stations, outside clubs, near convenience stores. His methods were simple, quiet, efficient. Drug them, strangle them, and then keep them. He began taking Polaroid photographs, dozens of them. Photos of his victims alive, unconscious, posed, dismembered. To Dahmer, they were souvenirs, proof that he wasn't dreaming, proof that companionship, twisted, horrific companionship, was finally his. He hid bodies in his grandmother's basement. He snuck them through the garage in garbage bags. He dismembered them late at night while she slept upstairs, unaware of the horrors happening beneath her feet. The smell became impossible to ignore. She complained about it often, asking, "Jeff, what is that odor?" And Dahmer, calm and polite, always had a ready answer. Just some spoiled meat. Just plumbing issues. Just trash I forgot to take out. He said it with such quiet sincerity that she believed him, because Jeffrey Dahmer had mastered the art of seeming harmless. A quiet neighbor, a shy grandson, a polite young man who kept to himself. No one saw the warning signs. No one imagined what he was doing behind closed doors. But Dahmer's hunger, that dark, growing hunger, was no longer satisfied with temporary company. He wanted something permanent, something he could keep forever, something that couldn't walk away. It was around this time that he became obsessed with the idea of creating a zombie, a living person who was completely under his control. He researched, experimented, escalated. The killings became ritualistic. The dismemberment became meticulous. The trophies became more disturbing. And then, in 1990, his grandmother asked him to move out. The smells, the late nights, the constant accidents, the strange behavior. She couldn't handle it anymore. Dahmer found a place closer to downtown Milwaukee. Apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments. A small one-bedroom unit on the second floor. Cheap, quiet, isolated. Perfect for disappearing into the shadows. No one knew it then, but that apartment would soon become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer moved in with two things, his belongings and his hunger. Part 4. Inside Apartment 213. By the late 1980s, Jeffrey Dahmer had found the perfect place for the darkness inside him to grow. A quiet, aging building called the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street in Milwaukee. The rent was cheap, the neighbors kept to themselves, and no one asked questions. Apartment 213 was small, one bedroom, faded carpet, secondhand furniture. But to Dahmer, it was more than a home. It was a private world where he could control everything. From the outside, nothing about the apartment stood out. Neighbors passed him in the hallway and described him as polite, soft-spoken, a little odd but harmless. No one imagined that behind that plain beige door, something unthinkable was unfolding night after night. Every time Dahmer brought someone back, the same pattern repeated itself. He knew exactly where to place the couch, exactly where to position the bed, exactly how to arrange the bottles of rum and beer so they looked casual. To anyone else, it was an ordinary bachelor apartment. But Dahmer had crafted it with purpose, with precision. Everything inside served a role in maintaining control. The air inside was heavy, sometimes sweet, sometimes sour, always strange. Neighbors complained about the smell drifting into the hallway. They said it was like rotting meat. Dahmer told them it was spoiled pork chops. Other times he said his freezer had broken. People believed him. They always believed him. Most nights began the same way. Dahmer wandered the bars, the nightclubs, the streets around downtown Milwaukee, searching for someone alone, someone vulnerable, someone he could convince to follow him home. Sometimes he offered money. Sometimes he offered beer. Sometimes he promised photos. Whatever worked. Once inside apartment 213, Dahmer charmed his guests with soft conversation and calm eyes. He offered drinks, strong ones, mixed with something extra. When the men felt dizzy, tired, or weak, Dahmer guided them to the bedroom. From there, everything spiraled into darkness. Inside that small room, his fantasies took full form. He didn't want company. He wanted possession, control, silence. He wanted bodies that couldn't leave, bodies that couldn't reject him, bodies he could keep exactly where he wanted them. And when the life left their eyes, his ritual continued. He photographed them, posed them, documented them. He kept Polaroids, dozens of them, arranged, sorted, hidden. Each picture was a memory he could revisit long after the moment passed. The neighbors heard strange things sometimes. The sound of a power drill, a thud, a heavy object being dragged across the floor. But in a building full of people struggling to get by, no one looked too closely. No one wanted to get involved. Inside the apartment, the horror grew thicker with every passing month. Dahmer bought a large blue barrel and placed it in his bedroom. He filled it with acid, a way to erase the bodies, to dissolve them slowly, piece by piece. The barrel sat there, looming, like a silent witness to everything he was doing. On the shelves and in drawers were small trophies, skulls he cleaned and painted, bones he kept stored carefully, boxes containing pieces of people who had once laughed, talked, and trusted him. The refrigerator held things no human being should ever keep. And through it all, Dahmer moved with a calm, methodical routine. He went to work, he smiled at neighbors, he bought groceries. He blended in so perfectly that no one suspected the nightmare happening just feet away from their own apartments. But as the months passed, something inside him began breaking. He became careless. He drank more. He talked to himself. He left the door unlocked. He started killing in quicker succession, unable to stop. The hunger was constant, a need he could no longer control. He tried to create something permanent, something that could never abandon him. He attempted experiments that blurred the line between life and death, desperate to keep someone with him forever. These attempts failed again and again, leaving him more desperate, more reckless, more dangerous. Apartment 213 was no longer just a hiding place for his crimes. It had become a factory of nightmares, a world built on fear, secrecy, and death. And yet, the door remained closed to everyone except the men he brought inside. But monsters make mistakes. And in May of 1991, Dahmer made one that nearly exposed him. A boy stumbled out into the street, confused and bleeding. Police arrived. They questioned Dahmer. He talked his way out of it. They believed him again. His confidence grew. His control tightened. But the walls of apartment 213 were closing in. One last victim, one last attempt at control would finally unravel everything he'd built in that tiny room. And it would all begin with a man named Tracy Edwards. Part 5. The Escape That Exposed a Monster. By the summer of 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was losing control. The killings were coming faster, the nights were blurring together, and his apartment had become a maze of secrets he could barely keep straight. But even as the darkness tightened around him, he went out hunting again. this time determined to find someone he could keep, someone who wouldn't leave him the way everyone else in his life had. On the evening of July 22nd, Dahmer walked the streets near the Royal Hotel, drifting between bars and clubs, watching people come and go under the neon lights. That was where he saw Tracy Edwards, tall, relaxed, and walking with two friends. Tracy wasn't desperate or alone like many of Dahmer's previous victims. He looked confident, comfortable. But Dahmer approached him anyway. He greeted the group politely, almost shyly, offering money to take a few photos back at his apartment. At first, Tracy brushed him off, but Dahmer kept talking, smiling, promising them it would be quick, easy. Eventually, Tracy agreed. His friends said they'd meet up later. It seemed harmless enough. Dahmer didn't look threatening, just odd, quiet. They walked through the warm Milwaukee night until they reached the Oxford apartments. When the door to apartment 213 opened, Tracy stepped inside and felt something shift in the air. He noticed the smell first, thick, chemical, unfamiliar. Dahmer apologized quickly, saying he'd been cleaning. Tracy nodded and stepped further in, unaware of how many had walked into that apartment before him. Dahmer offered him a drink. Tracy held it but didn't sip much. He glanced around the living room, the fish tank glowing in the corner, a stack of movies, a blue drum in the bedroom doorway. The place felt wrong, but Dahmer's calm voice kept him steady. He talked about photography, work, life, anything to keep Tracy relaxed. Then something changed. Dahmer's tone grew slower, his eyes heavier, almost distant. He put his hand on Tracy's wrist and said softly, "You're not going anywhere." When Tracy tried to pull away, Dahmer showed him the knife. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet reveal that sent a cold wave through Tracy's body. Tracy's instincts told him to run, but he stayed still. He knew one wrong move could end his life. Dahmer guided him toward the bedroom. A handcuff clicked around Tracy's wrist before he fully realized what was happening. Dahmer tried to secure the other wrist, but Tracy pulled back, resisting just enough that Dahmer couldn't latch it. For a moment, their eyes locked. Dahmer's cold and empty, Tracy's wide with fear. Inside the bedroom, Tracy saw the Polaroid camera. He saw the blue drum. He saw something that made his heart pound harder, a blood-stained stain beneath the bed. Dahmer noticed him looking and tightened his grip on the knife, but Tracy stayed calm. He talked to Dahmer gently, nodding when Dahmer rambled about needing someone to stay with him, someone who wouldn't leave. Tracy agreed with everything, even though his mind was racing for a way out. He told Dahmer he didn't want trouble. He told him he'd be a friend. He told him whatever he needed to hear. Minutes stretched into an hour. Tracy waited for the smallest chance, a distraction, a moment where Dahmer's guard lowered. He kept talking, kept his tone light, pretending not to be terrified. Dahmer eventually relaxed just enough to sit beside him, rocking slightly, mumbling to himself. When Tracy asked if they could move back to the living room where it was cooler, Dahmer hesitated, then agreed. That decision saved Tracy's life. Back in the living room, Dahmer seemed briefly unfocused, staring at the fish tank. And in that tiny sliver of time, Tracy moved. He shoved Dahmer with everything he had, twisting his body away, and sprinted toward the door. Dahmer lunged but missed, his fingers brushing Tracy's skin as he burst out into the hallway. Tracy ran barefoot into the street, the handcuff dangling from his wrist like a metal flag of survival. He stopped two police officers and begged for help, breathless, terrified, pointing back toward the building. The officers listened as Tracy explained what had happened: the knife, the threats, the apartment. They followed him back to apartment 213. Dahmer opened the door calmly, trying to smile. He said it was a misunderstanding, a lover's quarrel, nothing serious. But the officers stepped inside anyway. One of them noticed the Polaroids scattered in an open drawer, bodies posed in positions no one alive could be placed in. The officer froze. "These are real," he said. Dahmer's mask shattered. Panic flashed across his face. He tried to break free, but the officers wrestled him to the floor, handcuffing him as he screamed and writhed. Everything he'd hidden for years, everything inside apartment 213, was about to come into the light. And the world was about to see the monster Milwaukee never knew was living quietly next door. Part 6. The Confessions, the Trials, and the End of Dahmer. The moment Jeffrey Dahmer was handcuffed inside apartment 213, The truth began to unravel faster than anyone expected. At first, detectives thought they were dealing with a single assault, maybe a possible attempted murder. But the moment they found the Polaroids, the real ones, the ones documenting bodies in different stages of dismemberment, the tone of the interrogation changed completely. Dahmer didn't fight. He didn't negotiate. He didn't even ask for a lawyer. Instead, he talked. Inside the interrogation room, over long hours and long nights, Dahmer calmly confessed to everything, every murder, every method, every attempt to keep his victims close, even after death. Detectives expected resistance, excuses, or denial. But Dahmer was disturbingly cooperative. He explained how he lured young men to his apartment, how he drugged them, how he killed them without struggle, how he kept their skulls and bones as memorabilia, and how he tried to build a shrine made of human remains, a place he said would make him feel at peace. Investigators were stunned. The level of detail he revealed showed he remembered everything, and felt almost relieved to finally say it out loud. When they asked him why he did all of this, Dahmer gave no real excuse, only a chilling truth. He didn't want his victims to leave him. In January 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer faced 15 counts of murder. Crowds lined up outside the courthouse every day. Families of victims sat in the front rows, shaking with anger, pain, and disbelief as they listened to Dahmer's flat, emotionless confessions. His defense team argued insanity. They said no sane man could commit these acts. But the prosecutors countered that Dahmer knew exactly what he was doing, that he planned his crimes, hid them, and understood they were wrong. The courtroom was tense. Experts debated his mind. Witnesses described the horrors police found. Family members cried as they told stories about their sons and brothers, young men whose lives were stolen. In the end, the jury made their decision. Jeffrey Dahmer was legally sane. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, 15 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would never walk free again. But strangely, Dahmer accepted the sentence calmly, almost like he expected it. Inside Columbia Correctional Institution, Dahmer lived quietly. He read the Bible. He avoided trouble. He even joked with guards, a behavior that disturbed many. But among prisoners, he didn't have protection. News of his crimes made him a target. Men inside believed he didn't deserve to live. And one of those men was Christopher Scarver. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer, Scarver, and another inmate were assigned to clean a bathroom area. No guards were inside with them. Minutes later, Scarver attacked, beating Dahmer with a metal bar. By the time guards returned, Jeffrey Dahmer was barely alive. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too severe. Jeffrey Dahmer died at age 34. Some said justice was served. Others said it was too easy. But for the families of victims, Dahmer's death didn't erase the pain. It simply closed a chapter that should never have existed.